Alright, well, as far as setup goes, you're going to need a tripod head, preferably a ball head. Generally works best for me. You can mount it to a tripod, but if you move at all on your floor, unless you're on a concrete floor, you will move your entire camera every time you move. So I recommend mounting it to a solid table. This table is also bolted to the wall. It still gets some wobble to it or some vibration, but it's not bad. We could also mount this directly to the table too, but I prefer to use the ball head so that I can get different angles. Sometimes I like to have it looking up into a mushroom cap or looking down on something, you know. I have another rig that I set up for straight vertical shots. I also use that one for backlighting. Anyway, I have the quick release from my cheap ball head, and just pop it in, secure it, and I did not tighten this well enough. I do not like this ball head. The quick release plate doesn't have a slot to use a screwdriver on it or anything, so I end up having to use pliers. I'm just waiting for this tightening tab here to snap off one day, but it hasn't yet. I've been using this head for a long time. Came with one of my tripods. Alright, we're locked in. Next step would be put your camera in your rail. And now we've got our camera in the rail. Got left, right, forward, back. I usually have something like this board set up for holding various objects, and I'm going to let you choose what you're going to photograph. I recommend going with fewer shots to start out with. Don't try and do 100 deep shot or anything like that. You know, try and stick around 1-to-1 magnification, partly because it's what I have on hand, but partly because it's very useful. Boxes of shotgun shells make excellent stands to hold my pieces. They're heavy, and that helps. And I put some boxes of bullets because, once again, because they're heavy, on the ends, just to keep everything stabilized and solid. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to have to make an adjustment to this real quick. And this is extremely unbalanced, but I don't have two hooks that match, so I make do. Something else I want to talk about real fast. In general, if you're doing this kind of focus stacking with nature shots and stuff like that, really good idea to get creative and set up a pretty environment with some background that's going to create some color and everything. I've collected, I've got these wonderful little pieces of moss-covered rotten wood. They make excellent backgrounds, and got some grass here trying to come back. If you're photographing something like this moss here, say, with water droplets on it, and you want to spray it, make sure you spray it well before you're ready to photograph it initially, so that everything can react to getting wet before you're ready to take pictures, because otherwise everything's going to be moving. You'll have little flower heads turning and looking towards your lights, and you want to set it all up and let it sit for a while, or you'll have lots of movement. It's interesting, but it's not what you want. But anyway, I keep a collection of various leaves. This particular leaf right here has been the background of quite a few really pretty photos. I'll pop one or two up here now. This leaf, and this one as well has been used quite a bit. You can put together some leaves and then set the acorns on it and photograph a stack of the acorns, and now you have some color and character to your background. Or like with the moss here, this is not the same moss, but I took a picture with this rock. I did a stack with this stone in some moss similar to this. Here's the image, and it came out beautiful. So keeping stuff like this on hand to set behind your subject or in front of your subject. It's a really good idea. I've got a couple of pieces of rotten wood that I keep outside most of the time that have ferns growing on them, and I'll bring them in and I'll set them behind my subject until the fern is in image. I'll try and pop something up here with one of those. But, you know, it really gives your macro photography a lot more character and depth. Anyway, that's how I like to do it. I mean, you don't have to do it that way, but that's my recommendation. I found something really interesting on this particular little branch. Right here, under really high magnification, it looks like someone carved some runes into it. So I'm going to photograph that area and the lichen around it at 1:1. And I will make use of anything and everything I have laying around to get things stabilized where I want them for my photograph. So we're going to hook up our camera. And plug in our USB connection. I like to tuck the cable back out of the way onto something because you'll have to get your hands here very frequently and you really don't want it in the way. And once you're hooked up and you have Helicon Remote turned on, if you turn on your camera, the Helicon Remote should wake up and switch over to live view. We're going to set our lens to 1:1. I'm not going to go into how to figure out what a 1:1 and 2:1 is, but whatever your magnification you're using is going to be fine. I'm sure it'll just be more or less stacks or images in your stack. So I'm set at 1:1. Adjust our camera to where we can see our subject. I'm still getting used to this lens. It focuses so far away compared to extension tubes. If you're using extension tubes or a Raynox filter, you're going to have to be much closer to your subject than I am. But as you can see, we can move our subject around here, and right, oh, this is going to be interesting to get it to sit where I want it. And this is where poster putty comes in handy. Try to encourage something to stay put. Alright, right there you can see what my primary subject is going to be. And we're going to stack this from front to back. I'll get my diffuser set up. This is where we do a little bit of playing around. We also need to hook the flash up to the camera still. Haven't done that. This is why you want this. If you didn't have the off-camera cable, you could only shoot with your flash right here. That would be it. You couldn't get an angle. Alright, in your software, on the upper left corner, you'll see something called Fast Preview. And we're going to set our basic settings. It's probably not necessary. I almost always shoot between 1/1000th of a second and 1/2000th of a second. My particular lens is sharpest at f5.6, so I like to use that. If you use a higher f-stop, you'll be able to take less images and still get a good result, but it'll be a softer image in the end. I prefer to take more images at my sharpest point, and then once I'm done sharpening it at the end with topaz, it usually looks really fantastic. You're going to want to make sure that your flash batteries are fresh. Put in brand new batteries before you start this, or fully charged, and have a set ready too, because you're going to eat some flash, or eat your batteries up. Alright, let's try this again now that we have the flash actually turned on. And I want to drop my ISO to, actually let's try 100 and see if we can get away with that. less noise. And that's not bad, but I want to get a different look out of it, I think. And normally I would have my overhead light turned off and only have... Oh, I never put on my focus light. Look at that. And I would only have my focusing, my continuous focus light on, because I don't want any light pollution from other sources. However, since I'm recording video, this is kind of necessary. See, if you're doing it from above, frequently works out really nice. You can just clip this right on the top and it stays put. Figure out what angle we want our flash from. And I'm not quite happy with the lighting too. Bump up the flash brightness 2 notches. Right now we're at +1. Yeah, I like that. That's looking good. Alright, so we're pretty much set up to start taking a stack. I'm going to take a break for a minute and come back. In case you didn't catch it before, the fast preview button is here. First thing we're going to do is come over here to this and click focused on, and that'll bring up basically focus peaking. It'll change as we move through our focus range, helping us see what's in focus and what's not, so that we know that we're moving in appropriately tiny intervals. This may end up having more images than I intended for, but before we start, we do want to look at preferences real fast. On interface, you're going to want to go to live view noise averaging. That's this one. And turn that to normal. I believe by default it's disabled. It'll clean up a lot of the image noise that you get from the lower lighting that you have while in live view. And help you to see how sharp your image is. Without it on, everything looks soft and blurry all the time, and I wasn't happy. When I finally figured that out, it made things a lot better. Also, focus highlighting. The adaptive sensitivity is where I use it most of the time. This controls how sensitive the focus highlight is that we just turned on things that don't have a lot of details or a lot of contrast. You'd want to go to high sensitivity. Adaptive mostly works for me. Also, real quick, if this is your first stack, I highly recommend not doing something really complex, because it'll be harder to compile in the end. And then last here we've got highlighting color. I found that this shade of blue worked best for me. I'm slightly colorblind, and a lot of the other colors just didn't work for me very well. And one more thing before we get out of here. You're going to want to go into image saving and make sure that your images are being saved into a folder of your liking. And you can set up the folder format and file naming, etc. if you want. And then click OK. After that, each time you have finished taking an image or a stack of images, you're going to want to go up to Stack and select Create New Stack Folder. And that'll create a new folder for the next set of images. Each stack should be in its own folder, or you're going to end up with a nightmare. I started out I did like 20 stacks all in one folder, and some of them looked very similar to others, and they were very difficult to tell where one began and another ended, and it was just a mess. So definitely make sure every stack you do is all in each set is in its own folder. So let's get started. We're going to back with the knob on our rail here. We're going to back it up as far away from the subject as it needs to be until everything's completely out of focus. At this point, you're going to want to start moving really small increments forward until the first little spot of whatever your focus peaking color you chose shows up in your image. Real small movements. Focus stacking takes patience. I'm not a patient person, but for some reason I'm okay with it with this. Alright, we got our first little spot has shown up right there. Another thing, I don't know if I mentioned, you'll want to use your keyboard to snap the photos with, so that you're not touching the camera or the table. I always put the keyboard in my lap and take my hand off of the focus wheel before I take the picture each time. This reduces the risk of camera shake, etc. And believe it or not, even at 1/2000th of a second in the speed light, you can still blur these images at this kind of magnification. And when you go to 2:1 and higher, it gets even worse. So let's see if we can't take our first shot. There we go. Alright, that's our first shot taken. Now we're gonna turn the wheel, we're talking tiny, almost imperceivable motions. You're gonna look at the screen, you're gonna turn it just a tiny little bit and look at the screen and see how much your color spot has expanded. And eventually you'll figure out exactly how much of a turn you can make per segment. Like right there is a good spot for your next image. Depending on the magnification, the amount of distance will change. Like at 2:1, you're going to do half of the amount of a turn that you do at 1:1. And at 1:1, you can do, with this particular setup, you can do a pretty nice, I don't know, maybe it's 1/10 of a turn or something like that, and get some good crisp results. And we're just going to keep doing this. Take an image, move it forward, take an image, move it forward, and we're going to keep doing this until we get all the way through. I'm going to speed most of this up in the video. Try and keep them even as much as possible. And you want your last one to overlap your next one to overlap the last one a little bit. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but you'll get a feel for it after you do a few stacks. You may find that you end up making more images than you need, and that can actually cause your images to get blurry too. But I'll show an example at some point of one where the steps were too large and there's blurred bands through the middle of the image. And if I didn't say this earlier, I highly recommend you shoot in RAW, especially if you're going to use Helicon for stacking, because Helicon can compile your stack from raw images into a raw DNG file that you can then take into Photoshop and process in the raw and Adobe RAW, which I just love. Gives you so much more control than using JPEGs. And I know Zareen Stacker requires that you use JPEGs. Photoshop and Affinity Photo can handle stacking RAW, but they will not output RAW images. They'll only output compressed images or a TIFF. With this type of subject, we're going to want to go all the way until, since we have a complete drop-off to nothingness in the background, we want to make sure we go all the way until there's till a turn of the knob makes all of our color disappear, our focusing color. I think I'm making slightly smaller intervals than I need to be. I could probably be going a little bit larger. I tend to err on the side of caution. Those last little bits along the edges can always seem like they take forever. There's always some little thing still trying to focus. Be careful about going too deep on subjects too. I recently focus stacked a fly that was being unbelievably cooperative, and I got overzealous and started stacking the background without realizing that the colors of the fly and the colors of the background were very similar, and I ended up with a translucent fly patterned with the background, and it was not what I wanted. Pretty much ruined the stack. And as you can see, we have just last little hanger on right there of color. I'm gonna move, that's why. Still a little bit of color in it. It's right on the very edge. I'm not worried about it. I'm gonna stop right here. And that is our stack. Let's see how many images we just put in there. That was 75 shots. That was more than I had really wanted to be doing for the tutorial, but that'll work. Excited to see the results in the end. So I'm going to stop all this, and the next step will be jumping into Helicon Focus to put this all together.